Bride humiliates waitress at wedding until the billionaire groom says, "Now I'll marry Hertha." Champagne glasses caught the candlelight like tiny stars as Sarah carried them through the reception hall, her arms aching beneath the silver tray. She'd been working weddings at the Grand Rose Hotel for 2 years now, long enough to recognize the difference between celebrations built on love and ones built on show. Tonight felt like the latter, all crystal and silk and forced laughter, the kind that echoed too loud in rooms this grand. The bride, Victoria, had been cold from the moment Sarah arrived, her eyes sharp and assessing, finding fault in everything. Sarah had learned to make herself small at events like these, invisible, just hands that served and feet that hurried. But as she set down the last glass near the head table, she caught the groom's eyes, kind eyes, sad eyes, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. Something in her chest tightened, a feeling she couldn't explain, as if the night was holding its breath before something changed forever. Asterisk, asterisk, where are you watching from tonight? Asterisk, asterisk, Sarah had always loved the quiet moments before the guests arrived, when the ballroom was just empty beauty. Tables dressed in ivory linen, flowers spilling their sweetness into still air. She'd walk through slowly, adjusting a fork here, straightening a napkin there, imagining what it might feel like to be celebrated this way. To have someone look at you like you were their whole world. At 25, she'd stopped believing in fairy tales. But sometimes, in rooms like these, the old dreams whispered anyway. The other servers knew her as the reliable one. She never complained, never dropped a tray, never let the exhaustion show on her face, no matter how her feet screamed in these heels. Marcus, the head waiter who'd become something like an older brother, always made sure she got the bigger events because he knew she needed the tips. Her mother's physical therapy didn't pay for itself, and Sarah's paycheck from the diner where she worked mornings barely covered rent. Wedding receptions like this one, where wealthy families thought nothing of $100 tips, made the difference between making it and drowning. But from the moment Victoria swept in for the final walk through that afternoon, Sarah felt the air change. The bride was beautiful in that cold, polished, way-blonde hair like spun gold, a dress that probably cost more than Sarah made in a year. Diamonds at her throat that caught light like ice. She'd looked at the serving staff the way you might look at furniture, her voice sharp as she pointed out imagined imperfections, demanding one server be replaced because she looked tired and another because his shoes weren't shined enough. The groom had been different. James Mitchell Sierra had heard the whispers, knew he came from old money, the kind that built hospitals and had wings of museums named after them. But when he'd walked through with Victoria, his hand in hers looked more like duty than devotion. He'd thanked each server by name, apologized quietly for Victoria's tone. And when his eyes met Sarah's, something flickered their recognition. Maybe, or a weariness that mirrored her own. Now, as the reception swelled with music and laughter, Sarah moved through the crowd like water, refilling glasses, clearing plates, staying invisible. She watched James at the head table, his smile never quite reaching his eyes, while Victoria held court beside him, her laugh too bright, her hand possessive on his arm. Sarah had seen enough weddings to recognize the ones that wouldn't last, the ones where love had been buried under expectation and image. This felt like one of those. Then, during dinner service, it happened. Sarah was carrying a tray of desserts when someone's elbow caught her side, and she stumbled not badly, but enough that a single chocolate mousse tilted and fell, landing with a soft splat on the train of Victoria's dress. The room went silent. Every eye turned, and Victoria's face transformed into something terrible and bright with rage. "You clumsy idiot." Victoria's voice cut through the silence like breaking glass. She stood so fast her chair toppled backward, her hands pulling at her dress, at the small chocolate stain spreading across the pristine silk. "Look what you've done. Do you have any idea what this dress cost? Do you have any idea what you've ruined?" Sarah's face burned. Her hands trembled as she set down the tray, as she reached for a napkin, stammering apologies that caught in her throat. "I'm so sorry, I didn't. Someone bumped me. I can get it cleaned. I cleaned." Victoria's laugh was cruel. This dress is custom Valentino. It's ruined, and you'll look at you. I knew when I saw you that you weren't fit to serve at my wedding. You're sloppy, you're careless, and honestly, you don't even belong in a place like this. Where did they find you? Some roadside diner? The words hit like slaps. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes, felt 300 guests staring at her, felt her dignity crumbling under Victoria's contempt. Marcus was beside her suddenly, trying to intervene, but Victoria waved him away. I want her fired. Right now. I want her escorted out, and I want her to pay for this dress. Every penny of it. Do you hear me? Victoria turned to the hotel manager, who'd appeared wringing his hands. If she doesn't pay, I'll sue this entire hotel. My father's lawyers will make sure of it. Sarah's mind reeled. The dress probably cost $20,000, $30,000, money she'd never have, money that would bury her completely. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The room spun slightly, all those faces watching her shame. All those eyes, seeing her as exactly what Victoria said she was, someone who didn't belong. Then James stood up. His movement was quiet, but somehow commanded every eye in the room. He looked at Victoria, really looked at her, and something in his expression made Sarah's breath catch. It was disappointment so profound it looked like grief. That's enough, he said, his voice soft, but carrying through the silent ballroom. Victoria, that's enough. Jimmy, she didn't ruin anything. James took off his jacket, walked around the table, and gently draped it over Sarah's shoulders. The gesture was so unexpected, so kind, that Sarah felt her tears finally spill over. Someone bumped her. It was an accident. And the way you're treating her, the way you've been treating everyone here tonight, it's unacceptable. Victoria's face went white, then red. How dare you embarrass me like this? In front of everyone? At our wedding? I'm not the one who should be embarrassed. James turned to face the room, his voice steady. I need to apologize to all of you. I've made a terrible mistake. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. The room held its breath. Sarah wiped her eyes, confused, still trembling under the weight of his jacket, which smelled like cedar and something expensive she couldn't name. James looked at Victoria one last time, and in his eyes Sarah saw the end of something. I can't marry you, he said quietly. I won't. Not after seeing who you really are when no one important is watching. Not after realizing that I've been so desperate to please my family, to do the right thing, that I almost bound myself to someone who has no kindness in her heart. He turned to the officiant, who stood frozen near the cake table. This marriage hasn't been finalized yet, has it? We never signed the papers. No, the man stammered. Not officially. Not until then. It's done. James looked at Sarah, and his sad eyes held something like hope. I'm sorry you were treated this way. You deserve better. Everyone deserves better than this. Chaos erupted. Victoria was screaming, her mother rushing to her side, guests whispering frantically, some standing, some laughing nervously, unsure if this was some elaborate joke. The hotel manager was trying to restore order. Marcus was pulling Sarah toward the kitchen. And through it all, Sarah felt like she was underwater. Like the world had tilted sideways and she couldn't find her balance. In the kitchen, away from the pandemonium, Sarah collapsed into a chair. James's jacket still around her shoulders. Her whole body shook. Marcus brought her water, his face tight with concern. You okay, kiddo? She wasn't okay. She'd just been publicly humiliated. Had a man call off his wedding because of her. Had somehow become the center of a disaster she hadn't wanted any part of. The tears came harder now. Tears of shock and confusion and exhaustion from too many years of being treated as less than. Of being invisible until someone needed someone to blame. The kitchen door swung open. James stood there, still in his vest and tie, looking lost and determined at once. I'm sorry, he said again. I'm so sorry for all of this. You shouldn't have been put in that position. Sarah couldn't look at him. You called off your wedding because of me? Because of a stain? I don't understand what just happened. It wasn't because of a stain. James pulled a chair over and sat across from her, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. It was because I saw clearly for the first time in months. My father wanted this marriage, Victoria's family and mine have business together, old connections, all that aristocratic nonsense. I convinced myself I loved her because it was easier than disappointing everyone. But tonight, seeing how she treated you, how she treats anyone she thinks is beneath her, I couldn't pretend anymore. That's not my fault to carry, Sarah said quietly, wiping her eyes. I'm just trying to get through my shifts and pay my bills. I don't need to be part of some rich person's crisis. He flinched at that, nodded slowly. You're right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to drag you into my mess. He stood, started to leave, then paused. Can I ask your name? Sarah. He said it like he was memorizing it. Thank you for serving tonight with such grace. I hope the rest of your evening is better than this. After he left, Sarah sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time, Marcus hovering nearby with worried eyes. She thought about going home, about quitting, about how this story would follow her through the hotel staff gossip for months. She thought about Victoria's cruelty, about how many times she'd swallowed similar words from similar people. She thought about James's sad eyes and the jacket that still held his warmth. Asterisk. Have you ever faced something like this? Share your story in the comments. Asterisk. Finally she stood up. She washed her face in the kitchen sink, touched up her makeup with the compact she kept in her apron, straightened her shoulders, and made a decision. She'd finish her shift. She'd hold her head high. She wouldn't let this break her, wouldn't let Victoria's poison seep into her sense of self-worth. She was more than this moment. It's more than anyone's cruelty. When she walked back into the ballroom, now half empty, as the wedding dissolved into awkward departures, James was still there, sitting alone at a table near the window. He looked up when he saw her, surprise and something like admiration crossing his face. You came back, he said. I have a job to finish, Sarah replied simply, and began clearing tables with steady hands. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange blur. The story of the Mitchell wedding exploded across social media, grainy phone videos of James's speech, think pieces about privilege and character, Victoria's tearful interviews claiming she'd been blindsided. Sarah stayed off the internet, went to work, tried to pretend everything was normal even though staff members looked at her differently now. Some with sympathy, others with curiosity. Then the flowers started arriving. Every 3 days a new bouquet, ostentatious, just beautiful. Thoughtful arrangements with cards that said simple things. Thank you for your dignity that night. James, I hope you're doing well. James, your strength inspired me. James, Sarah didn't know what to do with them. She brought them to her mother, who was recovering well from her surgery. And her mother would smile in that knowing way mothers do and say, that's a man who knows he saw something real. One evening after her diner shift, Sarah found James waiting outside. Nervous as a teenager, holding 2 cups of coffee. Hi, he said. I know this is strange. I know I probably shouldn't be here. But I wondered if you'd talk with me. Just talk. You don't owe me anything, and if you say no, I'll respect that completely. Sarah studied him, this man who'd walked away from everything expected of him, who looked less polished now, more real. One conversation, she said. That's all. He sat on a bench in the park across the street as evening light turned everything golden. James told her about growing up under the weight of family expectations, about business school and trust funds, and the loneliness of never knowing if people liked you or your last name. Sarah told him about her mother, about her dreams of going back to school someday, about the satisfaction of a well-served table and the weariness of being overlooked. That night, James said quietly, when I saw you standing there being torn apart for something that wasn't your fault, I saw something I'd been avoiding seeing for years, that was about to become part of a system that values wealth and status over basic human decency. You were more honest in your silence than anyone in that room was, with all their polish. I'm not some symbol for you to project onto, Sarah said, but her voice was gentle. I'm just a person trying to live my life. I know. I do know that. I'm not trying to make you into anything. He struggled with the words, I'd like to know you. Actually know you. If you'd let me. Sarah looked at this man who'd given up his golden life in a single moment, who'd sent flowers and coffee and asked for nothing, who looked at her like she was worth knowing. She thought about the fear of letting someone in, especially someone from a world so different from hers. But she also thought about the courage it took to choose yourself, to choose truth, even when it cost you everything comfortable. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's see what happens." Asterisk, asterisk. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Asterisk, asterisk. Over the following months, they built something real. James worked with his lawyers to separate himself from his family's expectations. Started a foundation focused on workers' rights and fair wages. Sarah went back to school part-time, studying business management, still working her shifts but dreaming bigger now. They went to diners and museums, talked for hours, learned each other's histories and hopes. He never tried to rescue her, never played the wealthy savior. She never let him forget the privilege he carried. They were just two people finding their way towards something honest. Night, James asked her to marry him a year and a half after that disastrous wedding. They were washing dishes in her small apartment after cooking dinner together. No grand gesture, no expensive ring yet. Just him turning to her with sudsy hands and saying, "I want to build a life with you. A real one. Will you marry me?" And Sarah, who'd learned that real love was found in quiet moments and shared values, and someone who saw your full humanity, said yes. Their wedding was nothing like the one that never was. They married at City Hall on a Tuesday morning with Marcus and Sarah's mother as witnesses. Then had lunch at the diner where Sarah still picked up occasional shifts. The woman who owned it now, Mrs. Chen, one of Sarah's old regulars who'd bought the place with her retirement savings, had made them a small cake and closed the restaurant for an hour so their real friends could celebrate. James wore a simple suit. Sarah wore a dress she'd found at a consignment shop, pale blue like a spring sky, and her grandmother's pearls. When they kissed as husband and wife, it was tender and true. And Sarah felt something settle in her chest. Peace she'd been searching for without knowing it. They built their life carefully. James used his remaining inheritance to expand his foundation, working alongside former service workers to reform labor practices in the hospitality industry. Sarah finished her degree and joined him, bringing her first-hand experience to policies that actually protected people like the girl she'd been. They lived modestly by his family's standards. A small house, used cars, Sunday dinners with her mother where they all cooked together. Sometimes Sarah would think about that night, about Victoria's cruelty and James's choice, and the strange path that had led her here. She'd heard through the grapevine that Victoria had married someone else, another wealthy man, another show of a wedding. Sarah hoped she'd found happiness, hoped she'd learned something about kindness. Mostly, though, she hoped Victoria had learned to see the people who served her, to recognize their humanity. One evening, 2 years into their marriage, Sarah and James were at a charity gala for the foundation. She'd never gotten used to these events, but she showed up because the work mattered. A young server, maybe 20, was working their table, and an older woman at the next table was berating her for some small mistake, her voice sharp and entitled. Sarah watched James stand up, saw him walk over calmly, saw him speak quietly to the woman until she went silent and red-faced. Then he turned to the young server and thanked her, slipped her a generous tip, and told her she was doing a wonderful job. The girl's eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. When James sat back down, Sarah took his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing people. For choosing to see people." Squeezed her hand, his eyes holding all the love and respect she'd once thought existed only in stories. "You taught me how," he said simply. Driving home that night, windows down to let in the spring air, Sarah thought about the girl she'd been invisible, exhausted, convinced she'd never be more than her circumstances. She thought about how one terrible moment had cracked her life open, how pain and humiliation had somehow led to growth and love and purpose. Life wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magic, no fate, just choices, small ones and large ones, made every day. To either lift people up or tear them down, she'd chosen to stay in that ballroom after Victoria's cruelty. James had chosen to walk away from comfort. Together, they'd chosen to build something that mattered. something that honored the dignity of every person who worked too hard for too little, every person who'd been made to feel small as they pulled into their driveway. Sarah looked at their small house, with its porch light glowing warm and yellow, and she felt something bloom in her chest, gratitude, pure and simple. Not for the hardship, but for what it had taught her. Not for the pain, but for the strength it had revealed. She'd learned that worth wasn't something others could grant or take away. It lived inside her, steady and sure. She carried it everywhere now. Asterisk, asterisk, if you enjoyed this story, please like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Asterisk, asterisk.